Hello, I'm Linda, English teacher of Youth English School. Today the lesson is about the adverbs to show the frequency and degree. Normally, if you want to say how often you do something, you will need to use these words. For the adverbs to show the frequency, we will have this chart. If you don't do anything at all, or you don't do something ever, then you just use the word never. And then for the frequency, rising up, you will have seldom, hardly ever, and rarely. All these three words have the same meaning. Well, if you want to say something that you do more often, you can use the word occasionally. More than that is sometimes. Sometimes, for example, I sometimes listen to music. It means maybe a week you may listen to music like 2 times, 3 times a day. And then you have the word quite often. But remember that for quite often and often to show the better frequency. And then you have frequently has the same meaning as often. The words that shows the highest frequency is always. For example, I always brush my teeth before going to school. Then always to show the frequency that you brush your teeth every day. Okay? Quite often, or sometimes it's just often. Quite often is just a little bit more than sometimes, and then we have often. So you see that for here we have quite, a little bit. But if we have often, without the word quite, it shows the frequencies, more frequent than that. Or we can have the adverb frequently. And the most extreme form of the frequency adverbs is the word always. Let's move to the examples. One thing you need to remember that for frequency adverbs, you always have to use before the main verbs, but after the verb to be. We have, I occasionally see him. So the frequency adverb, occasionally, goes before the verb see. But she is often late these days. You have often, it's a frequency adverb, goes after the verb to be here. Okay? I have never tried Korean food. You see that the frequency adverb goes before the main verb. Remember in this case, we have tried. So the main verb is tried, not have. That's why we have never before the verb tried. Another example, they hardly ever go to the cinema now. So you have hardly ever goes before the main verb, which is go in this case. Sometimes you can use the adverbs at the beginning or end of the sentence. Let's say we have, they go to the zoo quite often. So quite often, you can use at the end of the sentence. But normally people don't say quite often they go to the zoo, okay? It sounds a bit weird. But for the word occasionally, you can use at beginning of the sentence. Occasionally, I work at the weekend. Oh my God, that'd be horrible. I don't really like working at weekends. Occasionally, you can use at the end of a sentence as well. For example, I play tennis occasionally. I can't play tennis. Oh my God. Sometimes my parents give me money. For the adverb sometimes, you can use it at the beginning of a sentence, like this example, at the end, or before the main verb. I can say, my parents sometimes give me money. Or I can say, my parents give me money sometimes. Okay, so you can use the adverb sometimes, pretty much at the end, in the middle, or at the beginning of the sentence. Move to the adverb to show the degree, which means how much something happened. I was a bit bored, or I was slightly bored. So degrees, this one is not really much. But we have quite, fairly, rather, and pretty. It's more than, bit, or slightly. Okay? It's quite large. It's fairly large. We have, they were very interesting. For very, we can have more extreme form of the adverbs. We have extremely, incredibly, and really. So you can see that the degree, just go up from a bit to quite so very, and also with the other adverb as well. With a bit, it's less than quite, but for quite, it's less than very. So you can see from this table, the degree, how much something happens. We have, the film was quite good, so quite goes after to be, as I said before, the frequency or degree adverbs must go after the verb to be. He tells very funny stories. So in this case, very goes before the adjective of the sentence. The book is a bit boring, so it's slightly boring, not much. We have three cases of degree adverbs: a bit, really, and pretty. The food was pretty good, so for pretty and a bit, it's like not much. But really, is want to emphasize on how much something is good or bad. The food is pretty good, so it's good, but it's not extremely or very delicious. The hotel was a bit disappointing, so it was disappointing, but not too much. This watch must be really expensive. But really, it shows the extreme, how extreme something is. The explanation was a bit unnecessary. We have the noun explanation. I know that this is the noun form of the verb explain. I want to tell you something. For the verb explain, you can see that for the, spelling, you have A-I-N. But when you change the verb explain to the noun explanation, you don't have the I letter in here, okay? And the way you pronounce it is different as well. You say explain, but for the noun form, you don't say explanation. No, that's wrong. It should be pronounced explanation, okay? Explanation, because it doesn't have the I letter in here. We also have another degree adverb, which is rather. Rather is like quite and fairly, but somehow rather describe a little bit of surprise in the comment or in the sentence. People don't usually like factories, but I think they're rather interesting places. So you have rather. Or in the second example, it would be clearer. Her cooking is rather good, actually. So you have rather to show a little bit of surprise in you when you actually taste someone's cooking. We have incredibly and extremely, which is stronger than very, not every. Sorry, this typing mistake. We are extremely busy at the moment, or I was incredibly tired at the end. Now, we have incredibly and extremely. They're very strong adverbs to show the degree of something. We have other adverbs, almost and nearly. Now, for almost and nearly, you can have these adverbs after to be, like it's almost or nearly 3 o'clock, so it's not exact 3 o'clock. But you also have to use these adverbs before the main verb, like I almost or nearly lost the match. So lost here is the main verb of the sentence, and make sure that you use the adverbs before the main verb. We have another adverb, which is hardly. Now, when you use the adverb hardly, which means something doesn't really normally happen, or the frequency is really low, he could hardly walk after his operation. So it shows frequency that, nearly like never. Okay? I hardly had anything to eat for lunch. So nearly like I didn't eat anything. Move to the exercise. For the first exercise, I have from number 1 to number 6. These sentences are the mix-up words. I want you to arrange these words to make the correct sentences. All right? I'll give you some time to do this exercise from number 1 to number 6. Okay, have you finished this exercise? With the first sentence, I can arrange all these words into, you have my brother often visit us on Sunday. Number 2, you can see that we have the subject, she, hardly. It should be ever. Hardly ever phones me. Here we have the subject, I have never broken my legs. Here we have the subject, I hardly, of course, goes with ever. I hardly ever saw him during the summer. Here we have I occasionally get up early. Okay. So we have for number 6, I think that there is a mistake in here. This one, it should be quite, not quit. So, okay, so it should be quite. I quite often lose my glasses. Okay, so that's for exercise number 1. Let's move to exercise number 2. Number 2, we have these sentences with the underlined adverbs. I want you to replace these adverbs with the adverbs from the lectures that you've just listened to with the same meaning. So I'll give you some time to do this exercise, all right? Okay, with this exercise, you have she seldom goes to the conferences now. So we have seldom, it can be replaced with hardly. The cinema was fairly full. With fairly, you can replace it with quite. For the other sentences, please check the other slides of the lectures so you can find the suitable adverbs. Exercise number 3. Respond to these sentences using rather to show a positive surprise. 1. Was it a boring evening? No, it was rather interesting actually. So you use rather, and I think you should use the opposite adjective to show situation. Okay? So I'll give you some time to do this exercise from number 2 to number 4. Have you finished? With number 2, were the children very noisy? So you can see that the word noisy is an adjective. Now find the opposite adjective of this one is quiet, right? So you should use no, they were, rather, quiet. So you have rather, and also the adjective, opposite meaning with noisy. Number 4, for example, was the weather bad? No, it was rather. Make sure you put the verbs in the correct tense. Here, because the question was in the simple past tense, that's why I put the answer with the to be in the simple past tense as well. Move to the last exercise of today. For sentence number 1 to number 6, I have the adverbs are underlined. So I want you to change the underlined adverbs to make the sentences more positive, to emphasize on something, show the frequency or the degree. Number 1, I thought they were very good. Remember, the more extreme form of these adverbs, you have incredibly good. Now, I'll give you some minutes to do this exercise from number 2 to number 6. Okay, the tricky part of this exercise is you have to make these sentences more positive. Okay, now I'll just do 2 examples for you and you will know what I mean by that. He's been getting quite good marks in his exams. So with the meaning of this sentence is positive already, so you can just change this one to a more extreme form of it. So he's been getting very good marks or really good marks. But I have number 5, for example. They said it was fairly boring. The meaning of this sentence is negative, so you have to change it somehow, just the underlined adverbs, to make this sentence sound more positive. So with fairly, to make it sound less negative, you can change it to slightly boring. Why? Because fairly shows the frequency or the degree more than slightly. If you change the sentence to, they said it was slightly boring or a bit boring, it shows the degree you can kind of decrease the degree of description of these adverbs. So you kind of make this sentence sounds more positive when you say just slightly boring or a bit boring instead of saying fairly boring. Okay, so make sure that you use the adverbs to show, how to make it more positive. It's not necessary all the time you have to use the frequency, like in this case from very to incredibly, from quite to really, but sometimes you have to use kind of decrease the degree or frequency of it, like in this case from fairly to a bit, because the tricky thing is to make all the sentences sound more positive. Okay? So that's the end of the lessons about the adverbs to show the frequency and the degree. Please have a look through all the exercise and the lectures today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you. This is Linda from Youth English School.